Welcome, curious minds. Today we're embarking on a deep dive into an aviation icon, a true giant of the skies, the Airbus A380. It's a story woven with ambition, groundbreaking innovation, and, well, a truly unexpected twist.
Absolutely.
We're going to unpack the comprehensive journey of the A380 from its ambitious origins through its surprising recent revival and really look into what its future holds. If you've ever wondered how the world's largest passenger airliner came to be, what made it so special, and why it ultimately stopped production, you're absolutely in the right place.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is how the A380's, let's say, turbulent journey serves as a kind of reflection of the broader shifts within the aviation industry itself. Big, unpredictable shifts.
Right.
We'll explore its incredible technical prowess, definitely, but also the commercial headwinds it faced, and how external factors, kind of remarkably, gave this Superjumbo a second life. Our mission today is to distill the most important insights from its whole story so you can truly understand this complex aircraft's, well, its enduring legacy.
Okay, so let's rewind then, right back to the very beginning. Where did the idea for such a colossal plane even, take shape?
Well, the A380's origins actually trace back quite a way, late 1980s, early 1990s. Airbus was keenly focused on challenging Boeing's long-standing dominance with the 747.
The queen of the skies at the time.
Exactly.
Yep.
And they identified what they thought was a growing demand for ultra-high-capacity aircraft, specifically for those increasingly congested global hubs.
So the core concept, which was initially called A3XX, I believe, it was fundamentally about moving a lot of people efficiently, especially out of those busy airports.
That's precisely right. Their design goals were incredibly ambitious, carry over 500 passengers, right?
Yeah.
But also achieve a 15–20% lower cost per seat than the Boeing 747-400.
That's significant.
Huge. Airbus saw it as the ultimate hub-and-spoke enabler.
Yeah.
The Superjumbo, designed specifically to alleviate airport congestion by packing people onto fewer, larger flights.
That vision seems clear enough. But when did this ambitious concept actually leave the drawing board? When did it become a concrete funded program?
Okay, so the A380 program was formally launched on December 19, 2000, and that followed a really crucial milestone, securing 50 firm orders from 6 initial customers.
50 firm orders is pretty solid.
Oh, absolutely. And these were big global commitments. Air France, Emirates, ILFC, the leasing company Qantas, Singapore Airlines, and Virgin Atlantic. The initial development budget set at a, staggering US $10–11 billion, even then.
Wow. That already sounds like a monumental undertaking. What were some of the key milestones and maybe some early challenges in that development phase?
Well, first, there was this impressive logistical feat, just getting the major parts transported across Europe for assembly. Huge pieces.
I remember seeing pictures of wings on barges.
Exactly. Then the first prototype was proudly unveiled in Toulouse, January 2005. Main flight followed pretty quickly, April 27, 2005. That kicked off a really rigorous flight test campaign. And right from the outset, airlines were offered a choice of 2 powerful engine options, the Rolls-Royce Trent 900 or the Engine Alliance GP7200.
Giving them options. But I have heard stories of some, let's say, serious turbulence during development. What really went wrong behind the scenes?
Indeed, the path was far from smooth, the most notorious issue. A severe software mismatch.
Software?
Yes, between different Airbus design sites. Sounds technical, but it meant wiring harnesses, crucial electrical bundles simply didn't fit together at all.
Oh, that sounds bad.
It was bad. The aircraft also turned out to be several tons overweight. This forced a complete, very costly wiring redesign. It led to over 2 years of delays, and those development costs, they ballooned to an estimated $25 billion.
$25 billion?
Yep.
More than double.
More than double the initial budget. It wasn't just a delay. It was a painful, multi-billion-dollar lesson in, the sheer complexity of global manufacturing and how critical internal coordination is on a project this massive.
So, with those significant setbacks, what did that mean for the highly anticipated first delivery?
Well, Singapore Airlines, they were the designated launch customer. They finally received the first A380 in October 2007. That was roughly 18 months behind their original schedule.
18 months late.
Yeah. Airbus's CEO at the time, he described the difficulties pretty frankly as painful. really highlighting those internal coordination challenges they faced. But despite these immense hurdles, the aircraft was certified and finally ready for commercial service by late 2007.
Okay, so after those really challenging beginnings, the A380 finally enters commercial service. What was that initial reception like? Was it the global spectacle everyone expected?
Oh, it absolutely was. That
Yeah.
first flight, October 15, 2007, Singapore Airlines, SQ380 from Singapore to Sydney, even auctioned seats for charity,
Ah.
generated immense global attention. People were truly captivated by this new giant of the skies. It was everywhere.
And then other major airlines quickly followed suit, right? Transforming air travel with this new flagship.
Yes, the momentum built quickly after that. Emirates became the second operator in August 2008. Then Qantas, Air France, Lufthansa followed pretty swiftly. And wherever the Superjumbo landed, it just unequivocally turned heads. You couldn't miss it.
Right.
Pilots, interestingly, universally praised its remarkably smooth handling, despite its immense size.
Passengers.
They consistently raved about the incredibly quiet, spacious cabin, and of course the novel amenities.
Ah, the amenities. Yes, I remember hearing about those. What were some of the most standout features that really redefined luxury air travel?
Yeah, this is where it got really interesting. During its peak, the A380 became absolutely synonymous with luxury aviation. Some airlines went all out, installing lavish onboard bar lounges.
A bar on a plane.
Oh yeah, full-size shower suites, showers at 35,000 feet, and even private multi-room suites in their premium classes. These weren't just add-ons. They reinforced its flagship status. They promised and often delivered an unparalleled flying experience.
Beyond the sheer luxury, though, what was the A380's actual impact on the broader aviation market? How did airlines really leverage its colossal capacity?
Well, at its zenith, the A380 was pretty indispensable on major long-haul, high-density routes. Think the world's busiest hub airports connecting continents. Airlines like British Airways found it invaluable, especially at slot-constrained airports like London Heathrow.
Ah, Heathrow.
Makes sense. Exactly. It allowed them to serve high-demand destinations with enormous passenger numbers without needing to add new, really hard-to-get flight slots. Maximize those slots.
And Emirates, they truly became the A380's biggest champion, didn't they? Building much of their global strategy around it.
Absolutely. Emirates cemented its position as, by far, the largest A380 customer. They integrated the Superjumbo as the absolute linchpin of their global hub strategy out of Dubai. They frequently scheduled multiple A380s per day to major cities worldwide. They effectively turned it into a highly profitable workhorse, but critically, by consistently leveraging its capacity for over 500 passengers, they filled those seats.
So looking at the big picture, who were the main global players who eventually flew this magnificent behemoth?
Right. In total, 251 A380s were delivered to 14 different customers worldwide. But Emirates alone, they accounted for a staggering 123 of those.
Wow, nearly half.
Roughly half of all A380s ever made, yeah. Other major operators included Singapore Airlines, Lufthansa, British Airways, Qantas, also Etihad, Qatar Airways, Korean Air, China Southern Malaysia, Thai, Asiana, and ANA from Japan. Quite a list.
The A380 clearly became an icon. What's particularly noteworthy is how its influence seemed to extend beyond just the passenger experience itself.
It certainly did. I mean, it shattered records. It was certified for over 800 seats in an all-economy layout.
800. Did anyone actually do that?
No airline ever used that configuration. But it showed the potential. It also truly pioneered significant innovations. Airbus filed over 380 new patents during its development, and it served as a crucial testbed for next-gen tech. It even flight tested the Rolls-Royce Trent XWB engine that was destined for the A350.
Using the A380 to test engines for its successor, almost.
In a way, yeah. Between roughly 2012 and 2019, it was an undeniable fixture at major international hubs. Carried hundreds of millions of passengers. It truly earned its title as the queen of the skies of its era. No question.
So it was big, it was luxurious, but what exactly made the A380 such a technological marvel underneath all that opulence? What was under the hood?
Well, the A380-800, that was the only passenger variant produced. It's a four-engine, wide-body, double-deck aircraft, built primarily from advanced aluminum alloys, but with extensive use of composites too, especially in the wings and tail.
Lighter materials.
Trying to save weight, exactly. Its dimensions are just imposing. 73 meters long, a wingspan of almost 80 meters.
80 meters, that's huge.
Massive, and a height of 24.1 meters. That unique double deck gives it a cabin floor area equivalent to roughly 3 tennis courts. Just imagine that space.
That's an incredible amount of usable space.
Yeah.
So how many people did it typically carry in actual commercial service then?
In a typical 3-class layout, first Business economy. It would carry around 525 to 550 passengers. While it was certified for that maximum of 853 in all economy, like we said, no airline did that, most settled somewhere between 450 to 600 seats, striking that balance between luxury amenities and passenger density.
Finding the sweet spot. And what about its operational capabilities, its range and speed?
It boasts a pretty impressive range, about 8,000 nautical miles. That enables nonstop flights as long as 15, 16 hours.
Yep.
Think London to Singapore, Dubai to LA, connecting distant global cities.
Wow.
Its cruising speed is typical for long-haul wide bodies, around Mach 0.85. And critically, it was engineered for efficiency, roughly 3 liters per 100 kilometers per passenger fuel burn, which was about 15% better per seat than the older 747-400 it was designed to beat.
Yeah.
But, and it's a big but,
There's always a but.
that efficiency only truly shined when the aircraft was flying near full capacity.
Ah, okay. So a key economic factor was keeping it absolutely packed. What specific power plants drove this giant through the skies?
It's powered by 4 large, high-bypass turbofan engines. Customers had that choice we mentioned, Rolls-Royce Trent 900 or the Engine Alliance GP 7200. Each engine produced around 72,000 pounds of thrust, a lot of power.
Immense power.
And importantly, these engines also incorporated advanced noise-reducing technology. That significantly contributed to the A380's surprisingly quiet cabin experience, which passengers consistently noted.
Okay, this is where the story gets really interesting for me. What groundbreaking technologies did Airbus actually introduce on the A380? What really pushed the boundaries of aviation?
Right, the A380 pioneered significant use of carbon fiber reinforced plastic, CFRP, especially in its wings and tail structure. It was the first Airbus to use it so extensively.
Reducing weight again.
Exactly. Its massive wing also features a highly complex high-lift system, slaps and slats, for superior low-speed handling during takeoff and landing, essential for an aircraft this size. The cockpit advanced Airbus's renowned fly-by-wire philosophy, using 8 large LCD displays instead of traditional instruments.
Glass cockpit.
Pretty much, yeah. It also introduced pioneering onboard data networks and new operational functions like brake to vacate, which helps pilots clear the runway faster after landing, improving airport efficiency. And for passengers, beyond just the sheer luxury, the cabin design offered, I think the figure was 400% more volume than a 7777.
400%.
Which enabled innovations like those spacious lavatories, more overhead bin space, and crucially, a lower effective cabin altitude for enhanced comfort on those really long flights. Less fatigue.
How did it stack up against its closest contemporary rival at the time, the Boeing 747-8, in terms of capability and maybe design philosophy?
Good question. The A380 is larger in almost every dimension except length compared to the 747-Intercontinental. It carries significantly more passengers, maybe 100 more, in typical configs, and has a slightly longer range. So while the A380 undoubtedly outclassed the 747-8 in terms of sheer capacity and that wow factor passenger experience, the 747-8 benefited from being, well, more flexible. It could operate at more airports because its wingspan was smaller, fitting into existing Code E airport gates, not requiring the Code F upgrades the A380 needed.
That's a crucial difference.
It turned out to be a critical advantage as the market shifted away from mega hubs later on.
And speaking of airports, what kind of major infrastructure changes did they have to implement globally just to accommodate the A380? It wasn't just gates, was it?
No, not at all. Its massive, nearly 80-meter wingspan put it in the highest ICAO Aerodrome Reference Code, Code F, that mandated substantial upgrades at airports worldwide. Wider taxiways, strengthened pavement, specific A380-compatible boarding gates, often needing those double or even triple jet bridges to handle the 2 decks efficiently.
Right, boarding hundreds of people takes time.
And sturdier runway surfaces to handle its immense weight on landing and takeoff. Many major global hubs invested billions, literally billions, in these upgrades. They created a global network of A380-ready airports, effectively building a dedicated ecosystem just for the Superjumbo.
So the A380 soared to incredible heights, no doubt, showcasing what was possible. But behind the luxury and the innovation, it sounds like a perfect storm was gathering, one that threatened to ground the Superjumbo, perhaps prematurely. What economic pressures led to its dramatic decline and ultimately the decision to stop production?
Well, you hit it on the head there. Those development costs, remember, they soared to roughly $25 billion. Airbus needed to sell hundreds of these planes just to recoup that massive investment. They initially forecast a market for over 1,200 very large aircraft VLAs, they call them. They were hoping for at least 700 to 750 A380 sales just to break even.
700 to break even. And how many did they actually sell?
In reality, only 251 A380s were ever delivered. The program reportedly never even turned a profit.
Ouch. So the market just wasn't what Airbus had so optimistically predicted back in the 90s.
And this really takes us to the fundamental strategic miscalculation that, ultimately sealed its fate. The A380 was conceived when that hub-and-spoke model was king, everyone flying into a big hub, then out on smaller planes.
Right.
But by the time it actually entered service in 2007, the industry was already rapidly shifting. And the critical insight here is just how quickly market preferences can pivot. Airlines started favoring smaller, more flexible, and crucially, more fuel-efficient twin-engine wide bodies. Think Boeing 777-300ER, the 787 Dreamliner, and Airbus's own very successful A350.
Their own plane competing with it in a way.
Exactly. These newer jets could fly economically on direct point-to-point routes, connecting secondary cities without needing to funnel everyone through those mega hubs, bypassing the hub.
So the industry's desire for flexibility and efficiency ultimately triumphed over the A380's sheer capacity and that hub-centric design.
That sums it up perfectly. Airlines found they could better meet growing demand by simply increasing flight frequencies with these mid-sized jets, rather than taking the huge risk of trying to consistently fill giant 500-plus seaters day in, day out. And it's worth noting, Boeing had actually predicted this. They saw a very limited market for planes larger than their own 747. Plus, rapid fuel efficiency gains in those newer twin-engine jets just kept eroding the A380's perceived advantage.
I can imagine those shifting dynamics must have led to some pretty significant order cancellations then. How badly did that impact the program's viability?
Oh, the impact was huge. Many of those initial buyers either canceled their orders entirely or drastically cut back their commitments. Virgin Atlantic, for example, completely scrapped its order. The dedicated freighter version, the A380F, it looked promising initially, but saw all 27 of its orders canceled eventually. Nobody wanted a freighter that big.
Really? No takers at all?
None. And even some airlines like Skymark in Japan and Kingfisher in India, which had placed A380 orders, sadly went bankrupt before taking delivery. That left Airbus with even fewer confirmed sales on the books.
And so it seems by the latter half of the 2010s, the entire A380 program became almost totally reliant on just one single customer, Emirates. Is that accurate?
You're absolutely correct. By the late 2010s, if you looked at the A380 order backlog, it was almost entirely Emirates commitments. Airbus desperately tried to keep it going. They explored concepts like an A380neo with new engines and an A380 Plus with winglets and other tweaks for better economics, but they found no takers, really, beyond some tentative interest from Emirates themselves.
No other airline was interested in an updated version?
Nope. The ultimate death knell, though, came in early 2019. Emirates itself, somewhat reluctantly, cut an existing order of 39 A380s. They opted instead for Airbus's newer, more efficient A350s and A330neos.
Wow, even their biggest backer reducing their order. That must have been it.
That was the moment. Yes, that was the catalyst. In February 2019, Airbus formally announced it would cease A380 production once the remaining backlog, mostly for Emirates, was delivered. Airbus CEO at the time, Tom Enders, openly called the decision painful, but acknowledged the undeniable reality. There just wasn't sufficient demand for the aircraft anymore. The market had spoken.
Beyond those big market shifts, what operational limitations also played a role in the A380's decline? What made it so challenging for airlines to actually utilize effectively day to day?
Well, the sheer operational complexity and cost were enormous factors. Consistently filling 500-plus seats day after day on multiple routes proved an immense challenge for many airlines. Not everyone is Emirates with their Dubai hub model. This often led to low utilization rates, flying the plane on suboptimal routes just to keep it busy. And if an A380 flew half empty, its per-seat economics were just terrible, absolutely abysmal compared to smaller jets.
Burning a lot of fuel for empty seats.
Exactly. Its operating costs were very high, estimated at over $26,000 per hour. And maintenance. Yeah. Incredibly steep. You've got 4 engines to maintain, not 2, plus intensive checks needed for such a massive airframe. It's just a lot.
And those infrastructure limitations we talked about earlier, the need for those specialized code F gates and strengthened runways, that must have continued to be a persistent issue, limiting where it could fly.
Absolutely. Only those code F airports could efficiently handle it. That severely limited its network flexibility compared to, say, a 777 or A350 that could fly almost anywhere. So as the 2010s drew to a close, you started seeing airlines like Air France, Malaysia Airlines, Thai Airways beginning the costly process of retiring or storing their A380s far earlier than they originally anticipated.
They weren't getting their money's worth.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Second-hand values for the aircraft simply collapsed. There was no market for used A380s. And sadly, some of those early frames ended up being dismantled, cannibalized for spare parts to keep others flying.
So when was the very last A380 finally built and delivered? When did the line officially close?
The final curtain call was December 16, 2021. The very last A380, its manufacturer serial number MSN272, was quietly delivered to Emirates. That formally closed the production line after just 251 deliveries.
Only 251 compared to that initial forecast of over 1,200.
Yeah, barely 1/4 of Airbus's initial projected market size. Airbus's official stance was that, while it was undeniably a technical marvel, it ultimately failed to fulfill its commercial vision. They did, however, pledge to continue supporting the existing operators with parts and service for decades to come.
Okay, so production ends, the pandemic hits hard in 2020. It really seemed like the A380 story was definitively over at that point, didn't it? What happened next?
It absolutely looked that way. When global travel just ground to a halt, the A380, with its huge operating costs and immense capacity nobody needed then, was among the very first casualties. Most operators quickly put their fleets into deep storage, mothballed them. Air France, Thai Airways, Malaysia Airlines formally retired them permanently. Done. Many analysts widely called it one of the biggest casualties of the pandemic in aviation. Looks like the end.
But then, something truly surprising, almost unbelievable, began to unfold. It started making a comeback, didn't it?
This is where the story takes that unexpected twist we mentioned at the start.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. As global travel demand surged back really dramatically in 2021 and especially 2022, airlines began bringing A380s back from storage at an astonishingly faster pace than anyone, truly anyone, anticipated.
Why? What drove that sudden reversal?
Well, there were three key reasons, really, for this unexpected turnaround. First, just the sheer booming travel demand. That huge pent-up desire for travel meant airlines suddenly needed as much capacity as possible right now on their busiest trunk routes. The A380 offered an immediate way to add hundreds of seats practically overnight.
Instant capacity boost.
Exactly. Second, there was a serious aircraft supply crunch. Manufacturers, both Boeing and Airbus, were facing significant delays in delivering new aircraft. You had the 797 and DIX delays, ongoing 737 issues. Suddenly, those stored A380s, which airlines already owned or leased, became incredibly valuable assets just to fill this critical capacity gap. They were available now.
Right, better to fly what you have.
And third, the fuel price and economics dynamic shifted again. While fuel prices certainly rose, which you'd think hurts the four-engined A380,
Yeah.
the combination of very high airfares people were willing to pay and consistently high load factors, planes flying full, made the economics of a full A380 surprisingly attractive again. Often, it was cheaper per seat than flying two smaller planes on the same route. Plus, many A380s were still relatively young, aircraft-wise, and still under active lease agreements, making reactivation economically viable compared to buying or leasing something else.
Okay, so a confluence of factors. Which airlines are really leading this unexpected revival of the Superjumbo then?
By summer 2023, it was something like 70% of the original A380 operators planning to fly them again. And in early 2024, there were over 130 A380s actively flying worldwide, a huge comeback. Emirates, of course, remains the stalwart. They now have over 80 A380s back in active service, and they're demonstrably committed for the long haul, even embarking on this massive 4-year program to completely refit the cabins across much of their fleet, adding new premium economy seats.
Investing serious money in them still.
Big money. Sir Tim Clark, Emirates president, he remains a vocal champion of the aircraft. British Airways brought all 12 of its A380s back, primarily for high-density routes out of Heathrow. Lufthansa had a truly remarkable U-turn after initially announcing all 14 would be retired permanently.
I remember that.
They completely reversed course. They're reactivating 8 A380s for service right through the late 2020s, and they explicitly cited delays in getting their new Boeing 777-9s as a key reason.
Wow, so delays with new planes are helping the old ones.
Directly. Qantas is bringing back 10 of their A380s. Singapore Airlines also reintroduced A380 service on key high-demand routes. Qatar Airways reactivated several A380s, partly due to ongoing surface degradation issues they had with their A350 fleet, again highlighting that immediate need for capacity. Etihad Airways brought back 4 A380s for busy routes like Abu Dhabi, London, complete with their famous ultra-luxury residence suite.
The residence is back.
It is, and perhaps most surprisingly, even a startup airline called Global Airlines announced ambitious plans to acquire several second-hand A380s, aiming for a luxury transatlantic service. We'll see if that pans out.
That is ambitious. So how is Airbus supporting this unexpected resurgence of a plane they actually stopped producing? Are they helping out?
Yes, Airbus is actively supporting the airlines in reactivating these jets, providing technical expertise, documentation, parts, which is crucial for their continued safe operation. There's even been a significant spike in demand for what's called used serviceable material, or USM. Basically, spare parts recovered from A380s that were previously dismantled or parted out.
Recycling parts to keep the fleet flying.
Exactly. It's become a vital source to keep the now active fleet flying. This kind of symbiotic relationship between Airbus and the operators is key right now.
What about Airbus's own long-term vision for the aircraft now that production's ended? Are they just supporting it, or do they see any future roles?
Well, Airbus has clearly stated they will continue to support A380 operators for decades to come, providing that essential maintenance support, spare parts supply chain. They recognize their responsibility to the airlines who invested billions in the plane. And in a really interesting forward-looking move, Airbus even chose one of its original A380 test aircraft, MSN-1, the very first one built, to be a flying demonstrator for hydrogen propulsion technology. They're modifying it to test hydrogen combustion engines in flight.
Wow, so the A380 gets a role in testing future green tech.
Exactly. It signals its continued utility even in cutting-edge R&D roles because it's a large, stable platform. So while it's clearly a twilight renaissance for the A380 in commercial passenger service, and Airbus leadership definitely does not foresee designing another very large aircraft like it anytime soon, it's still finding work.
Okay, so the A380 is back, providing much-needed capacity right now, but looking ahead, for how long? What's the realistic future outlook for this amazing aircraft? Is this just a temporary reprieve?
That's the big question, isn't it? Most airlines currently plan to keep their reactivated A380s in service through the late 2020s, and in some specific cases, maybe into the early 2030s. This time frame often correlates pretty closely with when they expect to finally receive those delayed new replacement aircraft, usually the more efficient twin-engine wide-bodies like the 777X or A350s.
So they're bridging a gap.
Largely, yes, though Emirates, as the biggest operator by far, is a bit different. They plan to fly their A380s, which, remember, average under 10 years old, quite young for an airliner potentially until the mid-2030s, maybe even a bit beyond. Their huge investment in that cabin refurbishment really underscores this longer-term commitment. They built their model around it. But for others, Lufthansa will likely retire its reactivated A380s around 2030. Qantas probably sees its A380s lasting until about 2032, 2035. British Airways might keep them into the early 2030s as well. Korean Air and Qatar Airways, they publicly marked dates like 2031 and 2035, respectively, for their final A380 exits. So the timeline is generally the next 8-12 years for most operators outside of Emirates.
So by 2030, the A380 will become a much rarer sight in the skies again, a more exclusive experience, perhaps.
Yes, I think that's fair to say. The global A380 fleet will definitely shrink significantly again over the next decade. It's likely that only Emirates, maybe British Airways, and perhaps one or two others will still be operating sizable fleets by then. By 2035, it could truly be a very rare bird indeed, quite possibly nearing the absolute end of its commercial service life entirely.
What about a secondhand market for these planes as they retire, or alternative uses like cargo conversion? Is there any viable future beyond passenger service this time around?
Honestly, the second-hand market for the A380 has remained notably weak, almost non-existent, even with this current revival. While concepts like charter operations, maybe that global airline's luxury idea, do occasionally surface, operating an A380 outside a major established airline network is incredibly challenging. You have those unique infrastructure needs, the immense operating costs. It's just very difficult for smaller operators.
The economics just don't work easily.
Exactly. Cargo conversion. Technically very complex due to the double deck structure and, frankly, economically dubious. You lose a lot of volume efficiency compared to dedicated freighters. What's far more likely, unfortunately, is continued part out for spare parts. As more A380s are retired by airlines like Lufthansa or Qatar, they'll likely be dismantled, cannibalized to keep the remaining active fleets, especially Emirates, flying longer.
So feeding parts to keep the others alive.
That's the most probable scenario. Some might find niche, stationary second lives, maybe as unique hotels, restaurants, or training facilities, but certainly not in widespread commercial flight operations.
And what's the broader industry's sentiment about the A380 today, looking back? Is it seen as this brilliant failure or maybe a necessary, ambitious experiment?
It's a mix, I think. It's universally revered as an incredible engineering marvel. Nobody denies the technical achievement, and it's genuinely cherished by passengers for its unparalleled comfort, quietness, and space.
Passengers do love it.
They really do. But among airline executives and industry analysts, it's largely viewed as a product of a bygone strategic era, a bet on hub and spoke that didn't pay off as the market shifted to point-to-point. The consensus is pretty firm. The era of quad-engine jumbos for passenger service is definitively over. Another passenger aircraft as large as the A380 is highly unlikely in the foreseeable future. The industry's focus now is squarely on fuel efficiency, operational flexibility with smaller planes, and overall sustainability.
But you mentioned it again, passengers absolutely love it. Does that continued passenger affinity, that A380 effect, count for anything tangible in its twilight years?
You know, what's fascinating here is that it absolutely does seem to count for something. In the public eye, the A380's ongoing presence, this unexpected revival, is genuinely celebrated. Flights on the A380 routinely sell out, particularly in those premium cabins. Many travelers actively seek it out. They'll change schedules or airlines just for the unique experience of flying on it.
People specifically book it.
Yes. Airlines like Emirates know this and shrewdly use it as a powerful marketing tool. It's a differentiator. There's this genuine, almost sentimental hope among the flying public that the A380 will somehow continue to fly forever. And this raises that important final question. Could we ever see another plane like the A380? Some analysts, looking way ahead, cautiously suggest that if global air traffic truly doubles again, and if major airports become even more congested by the 2030s or 2040s, maybe a plane like the A380 might again make niche sense for a few highly specific, super congested trunk roads.
A big if.
A very big if. Given the colossal development costs we saw and the proven flexibility and efficiency advantages of running multiple smaller flights, manufacturers will undoubtedly be extremely cautious before ever taking such a giant leap in aircraft size again. The scars from the A380's commercial story run deep.
So the Airbus A380's journey has been, well, a true roller coaster, hasn't it?
Yeah.
A bold challenge to the 747, a genuine 21st century icon of the skies, then a seemingly premature commercial decline, and now, against all odds, this surprising twilight revival.
It really is a compelling case study. A technical triumph, no doubt about that, but unfortunately also a stark commercial lesson. It profoundly demonstrated that sometimes, even in aviation where scale matters, bigger is not always better if the underlying market doesn't fundamentally demand it or shifts away from it. Yet its legacy absolutely lives on, vividly. In the pioneering technologies it introduced, many of which are standard on newer planes now, and perhaps most importantly, in the heightened passenger expectations for comfort, quietness, and space that newer aircraft now constantly strive to meet. It raised the bar.
So for the next decade or so, you can still expect the A380 to remain a familiar, if slightly rarer, fixture on select high-demand routes around the world. You can still plan to enjoy that remarkably quiet ride, or maybe even grab a cocktail at that onboard bar at 35,000 feet if you're lucky.
Absolutely. And when the very last A380 eventually inevitably retires from commercial service, sometime probably in the 2030s, it will undoubtedly mark the emotional end of the true Superjumbo era, an era that this magnificent, ambitious aircraft so spectacularly defined. The question I think for you to ponder is this. Will the hard-learned lessons from the A380's ambitious, costly journey ultimately prevent another giant leap in aircraft design in the future? Or will those lessons simply reshape how and perhaps when such a leap might be taken next time?